Okay, so that's a reason to use the mic, maybe. Um, so anyway, she sends her regrets and love, and she's there probably right now as we speak, finishing her piano duties until the end of the service when she'll play piano again.
Let her know we missed her.
I will let her know, yeah. So I want to tell you why I had the little bit of time pressure. By the way, we're doing great. This is fun. But the little bit of time pressure I had is that many of you know I'm a musician. I'm an amateur musician. And so there's a group of us in the Buffalo Suburban Church who about 2 months ago began planning to perform this afternoon in the community in Lancaster. It turns out that there's a thing called Porch Fest. I don't know if you've ever heard of a Porch Fest. But a Porch Fest is when a community offers live, free music at various sites simultaneously, concurrently, people's porches in the community, and different musicians perform. And this is going to be in Lancaster, which is the community in which Buffalo Suburban is located. Lancaster Porch Fest created a site for religious music. So most of it is not religious, you know. I've been to Porch Fest before. There was no religious music, okay. But this is a site for religious. It's on the grounds of a church in Lancaster. And our group is going to perform there. And I'm wanting to do a really nice job because there may be people from the community that don't know any of us. It'd be nice to do well, you know. So we have rehearsed like 10 times in the past several weeks. And so anyway, I'm looking forward to it. You might think about us at 2 o'clock and pray that we are able to represent Jesus well, you know, by our music. The people who come there are expecting religious music, I think. So anyway, it'll be fun. It'll be interesting. So we go on at 2, but I want to get there early because, you know, you got to get it. We have a PA system that we don't have much experience using. So we got to get things set up and tested, tune my guitar, stuff like that. So that's happening. On a side note, I just want to tell you about how I develop my sermons, just briefly. So, like you, I want to spend time with God in studying His Word and in prayer. And I try to do that, and I'm convicted that I should be open to that and strive to make time. But you know what I found is that usually after I get started in the day, other things crowd that out. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but it happens. But I make a record in my calendar, whether I've had that time. And the act of making a record in my calendar puts a little bit of accountability on me, just between me and my calendar. Nobody else even knows it's there. But just between me and my calendar, I make a little note that I had this devotional time with God that day. And I try to do that every day because I want to show that on my calendar I did it, you know. It's one of the little things I do to help me be accountable. The other thing that's been a blessing to me is I've been reading through the Bible every day. I read something else in the Bible, and I read in a chronological Bible. Have you heard of those? That's where the content of the Bible is arranged in the order in which scholars think it happened. So obviously Genesis is first and Revelation is last. But a lot of things in between in our Bible are not organized by chronology, but by Jewish tradition in the Old Testament anyway. So for example, the book of Job, if it were chronological, happened well before the story of Abraham and the Jewish nation. But Job is sort of in the middle of the Old Testament. Do you see what I mean? So in the chronological Bible, things are arranged in the chronology in which scholars think they happen. So what I've been doing is reading through the Bible chronologically as my devotional time. It's been really helpful for me seeing how things are organized. And I'm going to show you in my presentation a little bit of the way it's helped me understand the history. So as I do this, I come across stories and I think, that is really important. I should make a sermon about that. So that's where most of my sermon ideas come from, is from my own study. And then I try, because in hotel rooms, there's a Gideon Bible, right? So I want to tell you how they chose that name. There were two businessmen in 1898 who were traveling, and as they traveled, they met up with each other, and they were both very committed Christians. And they thought, we need to do something to reach people for Christ. And so they started working and thinking about this idea. And in 1899, they formed a group of businessmen who were committed to spreading the gospel. Then around the year 1900, they chose the name Gideon. And the reason they chose the name Gideon, and let me just read it. They chose the name because Gideon from the book of Judges was known for his willingness to do God's work under any circumstance. So that's really like the love that we were talking about in Sabbath school. The love that does the work that needs to be done, even when we may not feel like it, because it's not driven by feeling. It's driven by principle. It's driven by God's love in the person's heart. So these businessmen started distributing Bibles in 1908. And today there are 240,000 members of the Gideons International. And since they started distributing Bibles in 1908, they have distributed 2.5 billion, that's billion with a B, around the world. It started in the U.S., but then it spread to Britain and then to other countries. But the highest concentration is in the U.S. And I think that their ministry of doing this has no doubt helped countless people know about the truths in the Bible, and then by that know about Jesus. So I really respect what they have done. Yes, Jackie.
My uncle was one of the very first.
Was he?
That started that Gideon Bible.
That's fantastic. And you know, it's wonderful when people who don't have to do good things see something good to do, and then they do it. That's wonderful. And that's kind of the theme of the love chapter in 1 Corinthians 13 that Ron was elaborating on, is that when we have God's love in us, when we see something that needs to be done, we just go do it. It's action, right? So anyway, these businessmen, I think, are an example to us. But they took the name Gideon because of the story of Gideon. So, you know, their symbol, by the way, is a clay pitcher with two handles. I don't know if you know. So imagine a clay pitcher and then two handles on each side. That's their symbol, which is their imagination of the clay pitchers that Gideon and his men used. So I'm going to go into the story. So in the story of Gideon, the Israelites are being oppressed by the Midianites. The Midianites were a heathen pagan country, or not country, like a tribe or a group that was near them and kind of around the Israelites. And they were militarily more powerful than the Israelites at that point. And they were oppressing and controlling and exacting duty. So, you know, so when the Israelites would grow a crop, the Midianites would come and say, okay, I'll take that. And they couldn't do anything about it. So they were oppressing the Israelite people. And that's when Gideon was called to follow God. But the people of Israel had an attitude of failure and despair. And by the way, It's real easy to have a feeling of failure and despair, isn't it? I mean, we can experience that at a personal level, but sometimes in our, I don't know, in our place of work or in our place of worship, in our churches, sometimes we feel like, well, we're failing as believers. You know, somehow things are not as successful as we imagine or dream of them being. So, but Gideon was experiencing this, and the people of Israel, and they were controlling and oppressing Israelite people. But I just want to show you a little bit of the historical context. We might say, when did Gideon live? So let me just show you a little historical context. So let's start at the time of Abraham. See, I think I have a little green pointer here. I think it may show up better here. Yeah, that's better. So Abraham lived in, we think he was born in 2166 BC. Just to give you a sense of when this was. 2,000 years before Christ, approximately. He had a son named Isaac. We know of Isaac. Isaac had a son, Jacob. He had another son, Esau, but we're not thinking about him at the moment. But notice the dates, 2066 for Isaac, 2006 for Jacob. And remember, there was a famine in the Middle East, and God had placed Joseph in Egypt. And in Egypt, under Joseph's leadership that was given to Joseph by God, there was food. And so in 1876 BC, we think that's when Israel moved to Egypt to escape the famine in Canaan. Now, I'm just doing this to show you, where does Gideon fall in the line of Old Testament history? Let's go on. So then, after about 400 years in Egypt, God rose up Moses. Remember, he was placed there in a floating crib, and that was God's providence to raise up a leader. And so Moses, scholars estimate, was born in 1526. And then some years later, remember, Moses was not a child when he led Israel out of Egypt. I think he was, he was, you have to kind of count backwards because of BC. But anyway, you can see that the Exodus began, and he was a mature man at the very least. And so then he leads the Exodus. This is better here. And they get to they get to the Promised Land after 40 years of wandering because of apostasy and lack of faith. And then they get to, Israel gets to Canaan, and in 1406 begins the conquest of Canaan, 1406 BC. So now they conquer Canaan. You remember, God blesses them. Jericho falls, all the other cities that they try to get, because God had promised them that they would have this land. So going on, then there's a period of time that we often gloss over. And this is a time when Israel was ruled by judges. This is after Joshua, but before King Saul and David. And notice that I've colored that tan color. We're going to come back to that. And after the time of the judges, in around 1050 BC, King Saul comes on the scene, and King David, and that's where we're going to end that timeline. Notice that it's interesting to note that King David is about 1,000 years before Christ. That's just an easy thing to remember. About 1,000 years before Christ is when King David was. But now let's go back to the period of the judges. In the book of Judges, there are 6 major judges. And you know some of these by name. For example, many of us know Deborah. Today we're talking about Gideon, and we all know about Samson. Those are the 3 most well-known judges. But there were actually 6. Each one of them was used by God to lead the Israelite people during this period called the Judges. So the story of Gideon is from the book of Judges. He was the fourth of the major judges. By the way, there were some other judges in there too, but these are the major ones. So we're going to talk about Gideon. And so let's recite some highlights of Gideon's story. And I'm going to ask you to find someone to talk with about this. So Gideon becomes Israel's judge, and rehearse with your seatmates some of these things. Do you remember about Gideon's call? He's threshing wheat, destruction of the altar to Baal. He asked for a sign, and the fleece test. Talk to someone near you about what you may be able to remember about Gideon's story. And if you don't remember some part, maybe your seatmate will remember, and y'all can talk about it. So I'm going to give you a minute. Find someone to talk to. There's someone there. Maybe it's been some years since you've read Gideon's story, and maybe some of these are not coming right back to you. But does anyone remember the call of Gideon while he's threshing wheat? He's threshing wheat on a place called a wine press or something, and he was doing that, I think, because he didn't want the Midianites to know he was threshing wheat, or else they'd come and take it. But then an angel comes to him and says, Gideon, God needs you to do something. And that's when Gideon says the text that Ryan read. Why are you calling me? I'm from the smallest, weakest tribe of Israel, and I'm just a farmer. I should not be the one. And in the story, there's like an angel saying, no, you're the one. God's calling you. So he prepares a meal for the angel, and instead of eating it, the angel calls down fire and burns it up. And Gideon, I think that convinces him that God is behind this call and that he should take it seriously and do it. And so then there was an altar to Baal. You know, one of the things about the judges, the period of the judges, the people would do well during one of the judges, and then that judge would die and the people would fall into apostasy. So there was like this sine wave, up, down, up, down. And sometimes our lives are like that. We feel like, we're doing really well, then we hit crash, and then we're doing well. It's not the first time this has happened to humans. And it happened to the Israelites. And God would raise up a judge, and that judge would help the people follow him and serve him. And then the judge would die, and then they would just fall into apostasy again. And they had idols to Baal, of all things. Baal was a heathen god. They had an idol to Baal in a central place in the village. In fact, his own father had an idol to Baal. And so Gideon wanted to destroy the altar to Baal, and he did it, but I think this shows a little bit of his caution. He did it in the middle of the night, so no one was watching him. And so they get up the next morning, and Baal, the idol to Baal, is all destroyed. And they say, who did this? This is wrong. No one should have done this. And then it comes out that it was Gideon. And Gideon tells the people, this is wrong. That's why I destroyed it. And we should not be doing this at all. And then God's saying to him, I'm going to use you to rebel against the Midianites. And so Gideon says, how do I know this is really what I'm supposed to do? So he asks for a sign. Do you all remember the sign? There was like a fleece. So a fleece is the skin of a sheep, right? And I think the first time he asked for 2 tests. I think he says, the first time, I'm going to set this fleece out, and in the morning, if the fleece is wet and the ground is dry, then I'll know it's you. And then it turned out just like that. And then he said, I still want to just check this one more time. Please don't be angry with me, God. This time, let the ground be wet and the fleece be dry. So the next morning, it was that way. And then I guess Gideon said, okay, I'm convinced. I'm just putting words in his mouth, but I think it could be. So here is an artist's conception of the calling of Gideon. So this is supposed to be Gideon in the foreground and the angel bringing down fire on the offering in the back of this artist conception. Here is another artist conception of the fleece test. So he's wringing out the fleece, and the fleece is just so full of water, it's pouring down into the bowl and running over. And that's another artist's conception of what that could have been like. But the story continues. So Gideon actually goes to war against the Midianites. But perhaps you remember parts of this story. So in the story, there are certain like sub-episodes. So I invite you to talk to a seatmate about those things: the reduction of the forces, the spying on the Midianites, and the nighttime attack and victory. Can you find a seatmate to talk about what you recall of these things? Just take a minute. Okay, so I'm going to jump in and just bring us back. So Gideon had, I think, at the beginning of this, he called out to the fellow Israelites and said, I need soldiers. Come and help me. Let's do this. And I think he had, and I'm not sure if any of you know the number. How many did he have originally? He ended up with 300, but originally he had, I think, like 10,000. How many? 25,000 maybe. And then God said something to him. I think he said, you have too many soldiers. How can you have too many soldiers is the normal response. If I'm going to go to battle, I don't want fewer, I want more. And God said, you have too many. Why would that be? This battle is not theirs, it's actually God's. So God doesn't need a lot of numbers. And in fact, if they had won and they had 20,000 soldiers, even though the Midianites might have had 80,000, but if they had won, they would say, well, we're pretty good. We're mighty warriors. But God said, you have too many. So the first thing he did was he said to Gideon, invite the soldiers, if they don't really want to do this, to just go home. So thousands of them went home. I'm afraid of those Midianites. I'd rather go home. So they went home. God said, you still have too many. And so then he said, have them pass through the stream, and don't tell them what we're doing. But if they bend down and, just make a deep drink, bending down, kneeling down, exclude them. Only the ones that scoop as they're going through the water, those are the ones we'll take. And he ends up with 300, right? So I actually have an image of this. This is an artist's conception of some of them, bending down, scooping water and stuff. Those were the ones that he sent home. But eventually, going back, he's got his 300. And then he's still not sure. And God says, you know what, Gideon? Take your servant and go into the Midianite camp in the night before they're going to do this battle. So Gideon goes into the camp, and he sneaks into the camp. Now there's thousands of Midianites. And he sneaks in with his servant, and he squats or hides outside a tent. And do you remember what's happening? There's a Midianite soldier inside the tent telling another soldier, I had a terrible dream. There was a stone that tumbled down the hill and smashed into the camp of us and destroyed us. And the other guy who's hearing it says, I know what that dream is. That's Gideon and his mighty men. They're going to come and destroy us. And imagine you're Gideon and you're right outside the tent, and you're hearing your enemy saying, Gideon and his mighty men are going to destroy us. That would, I think, encourage you. And I think that's why God arranged that. So Gideon goes back to his soldiers, and they have this nighttime attack and victory. And I think you remember in the story, let me go on to the next screen. This is an artist's conception, of course. And each soldier, if you read through here, each soldier was to carry a torch in their left hand and a trumpet in their right hand. Now, this artist imagined, a brass trumpet. It could have been the trumpet that many had in that time, that was a ram's horn. And it's still known in modern times. People still know about this. There's a name for that, but I'm blanking. Does anyone know that horn made out of a ram's horn? Yeah, I know. It's called a shofar. A shofar. And so maybe it was a ram's horn, maybe it was a brass instrument like this. And they had the torch, but it also said they had a clay pot. And what we think happened is they put the torch inside the pot. Then they positioned themselves, because they were all around the perimeter of the Midianites. And then at a signal of the trumpet sound, they smashed the clay pots, revealing the torch inside, which had been hidden from view. So the clay pot was probably to keep the torch from being seen. They smashed the clay pots all together. They sound the trumpet all together, and they rush at the Midianites. And you know the story? The Midianites panic, and they run around with swords, and they kill each other. And then they scatter, and they run away, and Gideon and other Israelites chase after them and are able to defeat them. It's quite a story, isn't it? By the way, I like this story for all the obvious reasons. I also like it because it shows that God doesn't need huge numbers of people to accomplish his goals. He only used 300. By the way, when he started the new kind of Christian church based on Jesus that was to be different than the Judaism up until that point. How many men did he choose? 12. And by the way, they were not national leaders, were they? They were good people, but they were average people. And it shows me that God doesn't need millions of people to accomplish his goals. He wants millions. He's inviting, but he'll do it however it needs to be done. He'll accomplish it. By the way, it'd be nice to have 100 people in these pews, and we're working on that. That'd be great. But God can accomplish his goals with even small numbers. Okay? I think that's one of the lessons from this story. Let me just think about some other lessons. So one of the lessons is that willingness and commitment, not human ability, are primary qualifications for service in God's kingdom. So here we are. We want to serve God, and we will bring whatever talents and resources we have. But the main thing God seeks from us is our willingness and our commitment. And he will use our talents for sure. But he mainly wants our willingness and commitment. By the way, there are a lot of people in the world who are not consciously, deliberately following God. And maybe if they knew more about him, they would follow him, but maybe not, because not everybody is going to respond to God. But if we can respond to him, if we can say, here am I, send me, right? That's one of the things. Or we can say, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Then we could be used. There's some more things. God sometimes chooses the weak to carry out his plans. It seems like he often chooses the weak to carry out his plans. Not always, but often. There were people that we see in the Bible who were advantaged, well-resourced, had good things going for them. And yes, he used them. One of the easiest ones to point to is the Apostle Paul, who had a very thorough religious training. And when he accepted Christ, he had all that as a foundation. And then he could serve God as an apostle very effectively. And there are other people in the Bible who had advantages and talents and stuff. But there are also many who didn't seem to have any particular talent that we could identify, but God used them powerfully. Gideon said at the beginning of the story, you're asking me to do this? Who am I? I'm nobody. But God uses any of us. So you may be thinking you're a somebody. Good for you. You may be thinking you're a nobody. Also good for you, because God can use anybody willing and committed. Let's look at some other. When God calls, he empowers. You don't have to have it all together. You don't have to have everything like lined up. You can trust in him. When he calls you, he gives you the power to do what he asks you to do. We see it in Gideon. There's some other stories in the Bible where he called someone and then he empowered them. Think with me. What are some other people?
Really, the woman at the well.
Okay, yeah.
She went there as a person that was less desirable
Right.
at the time, and she ends up winning over the
Yes, the whole village comes out to hear Jesus. Absolutely. You could probably say that about each of the disciples. Who else were you going to? Moses, yes, yes. David, yes. He's the youngest boy, and he's the one they were going to say, well, we have one more son, but you don't even need to see him. He's out, So that's another example. They are everywhere through the Bible. So none of us should say to God, I'm willing to be used by you, but I know you don't really want me. You have in mind someone else. I have a feeling He is ready to use you. So when he calls, he empowers. Some others, God will help us through our doubts and questions. Gideon kept asking God, are you sure? Is it me? Do you really want me to do this? And God was patient with him. You want a test? Okay, fleece. You need more assurance? Spy on the Midianites. And God helped him through. And by the way, eventually he came to a point of faith. I think it takes a bit of faith to rush tens of thousands of enemy soldiers with only 300 men. I think that takes some faith. He got there by God's gifting and by God's assurance and presence with him. But I think God helped him through his doubts. It's okay to have doubts, isn't it? If they're honest doubts. By the way, there was a disciple, Thomas. We call doubting Thomas. He said, except unless I see, I will not believe. So Jesus shows up and says, okay, Thomas, you want to touch me? And Thomas says, my Lord and my Savior. And he believes. By the way, Jesus didn't censure him. He just said, okay, see me, believe. So if you have questions and doubts, don't feel guilty about that. Pray to God. God, help me through this. Show me what I need to see. And I think there's Bible evidence that he will help you with that. Here's another thing from Gideon's story. We didn't look at it, but if you look at the end of his story in chapter 8, Gideon goes on to do some not so effective, appropriate things. He's a little cruel to some people. He has an idea to do something and it backfires. So if you want to see what it is, read chapter 8. But the point I'm trying to make here is that being used in a great way by God does not imply that everything we have done in the past or everything we will do is approved by him. We're humans. We make mistakes. So Gideon has this idea that when they captured all these Midianites, it was their custom to have gold earrings. The men had gold earrings. And they captured the men. They actually killed them. They kept the gold earrings. So Gideon said, send me those gold earrings. We're going to do something with them. Now, I don't know what was a better use of them, but it was unwise for Gideon. He made a golden image of a priestly garment called an ephah, or I don't know how to pronounce it. But he had it made. God didn't ask him to do that. That was his own idea. And when he made it, then all the Israelites who were prone to idol worship started worshiping this thing. He didn't create it to be an idol. He created it to memorialize God's providence. But God didn't direct him to do that. He did it on his own, and it turned into a disaster. The Israelite people started worshiping that. So I'm trying to make the point that just because someone was used by God in a great way doesn't mean everything they do is endorsed by God. People make mistakes even after being used by God. So we are told in the Bible to check everything, test the spirits. So even when someone has done something great for God, we should be careful. So if Gideon was used by God against the Midianites, and we sometimes say when you do something, when one person is, or a group is used to be what we call the point of the spear, they're the first persons to go into battle. They're at the very forefront of the action. And Gideon and his men were the point of God's spear, a sword against the Midianites. Are we called to fight some enemies today as well? Who or what are God's enemies in 2026? So, Ron, you were talking about it's everywhere. So, yes, there is evil around us. By the way, I see a lot of good around us too, but there's certainly evil around us. And I don't want to be oblivious to the good, because there is good all around us. But I also want to be with my eyes open. I want to see the evil and recognize it for the evil that it is. So, we don't have Midianites encamped around our church right now, or the Adventist church or the Christian church doesn't have open adversaries. But there are clandestine adversaries, because we believe the devil is always trying to interfere, ruin, destroy God's work. So how does God fight that? Well, he might fight that through us. So what are God's enemies? Well, any group or any person who is saying or working against God is God's enemy, right? So if we somehow knew about people who were trafficking in drugs and ruining people's lives, I think I would call that an enemy of God. I'm not going to go out and attack them with guns myself, but I'm going to be alert, and I'm going to look for ways to oppose that and do what I can to eliminate that. There's human trafficking. Yes?
I was going to say that it states in the Bible that there is a time for war and a time for peace.
True, yeah. And there, Israel was under a direct leadership of God, whereas nowadays we don't have that direct leadership of God. But yes, there have been wars that the United States has fought that most of us thought were just wars, that they were wars that needed to be fought in order to protect innocent people or a way of life or things like that. Yeah, so that would be a time for war. Yeah. I was going to say human trafficking. What a scourge to have people exploited. And I don't know about it in a personal way. It hasn't happened to me or anyone I know. But I can oppose it. I can say we should have ways to stop that. By the way, in the Adventist church, we have a promotion called End It Now, and it's something that the Adventist church does to oppose exploitation of people. And there is a program about that, and so things like that are enemies of God because they destroy people. And what we notice is God's enemy, Satan, is trying to destroy people. And God is trying to raise us up, make us better, make us healthy, make us moral, make us loving. So maybe we can oppose these enemies around us just by standing for the right and standing against that if it ever becomes normal. I don't want that stuff to ever become normal. And I don't want crime to become normal. I don't want corruption to become normal. These things I personally want to oppose. I want to find ways to stand against them, even though I don't know that we're ultimately going to be successful, because our understanding of prophecy is that from a human standpoint, it looks like evil wins on this planet, and then Jesus comes and in the second coming and sets it all right. But I still think I should oppose it. If there's stuff going on and I'm silent, it almost makes it look like I am not bothered by it, or it makes it look like I sanction it. Okay is okay. So I want to try to be against these things in a tactful way, and to say, the Bible teaches me that all humans deserve dignity and protection from things like exploitation or things like prejudice. All humans deserve to have certain things in our Constitution that calls them inalienable rights. Those inalienable rights, that also says they're God-given. That means it wasn't by human action that we have these rights. It was given to us by God. So anyway, those are things that in my thinking are ways that we can oppose the enemies of God. There is a well-known text, and I have a version from the New Living Translation. I invite you to read this with me out loud in a choral fashion as we wrap up our service. Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all strategies of the devil. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Therefore, put on every piece of God's armor, so you will be able to resist the enemy in the time of evil. Then after the battle, you will still be standing firm. May we remember Gideon as an exemplar for how God used a person who was a relative nobody to achieve things for his kingdom. And in the same way, he is surely able to use each of us. Let's have our closing song.
My wife said, "Do you know this song?" Oh, I know this song. This is a great song. Hymn number 202, Hail Him, the King of Glory. Tell it to every kindred and nation, tell it far and near. Earth's darkest night will fade with the dawning, Jesus will soon appear. Hail him, the King of glory, once the Lamb for sinners slain. Tell the wondrous story, Jesus comes to reign. Nations again in strife and commotion, warnings by the way. Signs in the heavens, unerring omens, hail the glorious day. Hail him, the King of glory, once the Lamb for sinners slain. Tell the wondrous story, Jesus comes to reign. Children of God, look up with rejoicing, shout and sing his praise. Blessed are they who, waiting and watching, look for the dawning rays. Hail him, the King of glory, once the Lamb for sinners slain. Tell the wondrous story, Jesus comes to reign. Amen.
Oh, Father, as we contemplate the way you use Gideon, we are convicted that you could use us. And Father, if there is some time when we need to stand up for the right, if there is some time that we need to oppose Satan in the way he is exploiting people, please give us your spirit to fight against that in a parallel way to how you used Gideon. And in fact, Lord, as we are praying here together, I invite you to say to God by raising your hand, I want to be like Gideon. I want to oppose evil whenever I have the opportunity. If you feel that way, would you raise your hand to God now and say, God, I want to be that person to represent you among those around me. And Father, we ask that you will go with us this week. May we be ambassadors for you. May we have love in our hearts like Jesus would have for those around us. And in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.